Ethan never expected that the car his ex once mocked would become the spark for the wildest twist of his life. The moment a collector offered nearly $200,000 for his restored 1969 Charger, everything changed. Just hours after the offer went public, Melissa suddenly reappeared at his door as if the past 3 years of silence had never existed. She wasn't there to apologize or reconnect. She came with a claim, a story, and a plan to take half of something she never believed in. What began as a simple restoration project quickly spiraled into a storm of lies, manipulation, and the kind of confrontation no one ever imagines they'll face. And it all started with one car she once called a worthless pile of junk. Ethan still remembers the day he found the Charger sitting behind an old barn, half buried under dust and rust. Most people would have walked away the moment they saw the peeling paint, the missing panels, and the engine that looked like it hadn't turned over in decades. But Ethan didn't see a wreck. He saw potential, a chance to bring a piece of American muscle back to life, and a project he could pour his passion into. He bought it for $8,500, cash scraped together from overtime shifts and months of saving. When he brought the car home, he expected Melissa to be excited or at least curious, but the first thing she said was that he had wasted his money. She didn't even look at the car before shaking her head and telling him it was a terrible idea. From that day forward, every time Ethan mentioned the Charger, Melissa had something negative to say. She didn't understand why anyone would spend time restoring an old car when they could buy something new. She complained that it took up space in the garage. She complained that it smelled like oil and metal. She complained that Ethan was choosing the car over her. Even when Ethan tried to explain how rare the model was and how restoring it was his lifelong dream, Melissa dismissed him with a frustrated wave of her hand. She told friends and family that he was obsessed with junk, and she teased him at gatherings about his rust bucket hobby. But Ethan kept going, because working on that car brought him a sense of peace he didn't find anywhere else. Every bolt he removed, every piece he cleaned, and every part he replaced made him feel like he was rebuilding something bigger than a vehicle. He was rebuilding a part of himself. Meanwhile, Melissa grew more irritated as the months passed. Whenever she looked at their budget, she circled every dollar Ethan spent on parts or tools. She treated each purchase like a personal betrayal. Instead of encouraging him, she lectured him about priorities and responsibilities, even though he paid all his bills and never missed a commitment. Their disagreements became a routine. Ethan would come home excited about a new component he found, and Melissa would shut him down before he could finish a sentence. It wasn't just the money. It was the way she looked at the car, as if it were the reason her life wasn't going exactly the way she imagined. The irony was that Ethan never asked her for help, involvement, or approval. He only wanted space to build something meaningful to him. But Melissa couldn't stand that the Charger mattered. She couldn't stand that something besides her held Ethan's focus. And without either of them realizing it, the car became the symbol of a much deeper problem between them. A problem that would only grow as the restoration progressed. For the next 3 years, Ethan devoted every spare hour to bringing the Charger back to life. He researched rare parts, joined online forums, watched restoration videos, and spent countless nights in the garage with nothing but a toolbox and a stubborn belief that the car deserved a second chance. Every upgrade felt like progress, even when the work was slow and exhausting. He replaced the suspension, rewired the electrical system, rebuilt the carburetor, and sanded down panels until his hands ached. The more the car transformed, the more determined he became. But with every improvement, Melissa's resentment seemed to grow. She walked into the garage only to criticize, never to admire. When Ethan proudly showed her the refurbished engine bay, she rolled her eyes and muttered that it looked the same as before. Whenever he ordered parts, she questioned every purchase and demanded to know the exact amount he spent, down to the last cent. She kept a notebook where she recorded each expense like a debt he owed her. She treated the project not as his dream, but as a threat to her imagined future. Instead of supporting him, Melissa accused him of ruining their chances of buying a house, even though Ethan repeatedly reminded her that he had never agreed to such a timeline. She blamed the car for their arguments, for her stress, and even for their lack of vacations. In her mind, everything that didn't go perfectly was somehow tied to the charger. When the car began drawing attention online, Melissa's behavior only worsened. Ethan posted a few photos of his progress on a muscle car forum, hopping for feedback, and was stunned when the post went viral among restoration enthusiasts. People praised his attention to detail and asked questions about his process. Some even messaged him privately to offer rare parts they thought he might need. Instead of feeling proud of him, Melissa accused him of seeking validation and wasting time talking to strangers. At local car meets, fellow enthusiasts approached him to admire the work he'd done so far. They complimented the craftsmanship and encouraged him to finish the build. Melissa hated those events. She stood on the sidelines with crossed arms, complaining about the heat, the noise, and the smell of gasoline. When someone complimented the car in front of her, she awkwardly inserted herself into the conversation, acting as though the project inconvenienced her more than it inspired Ethan. Meanwhile, Ethan pushed forward, even though the emotional weight grew heavier. He stayed up late buffing chrome parts, not just because he loved the work, but because the garage became the only place where he felt understood. Every time he tightened a bolt or polished a panel, it felt like an escape from the tension building inside the house. But he couldn't ignore how Melissa looked at him anymore. She didn't see his dedication or his passion. She only saw an obsession she couldn't control. And as the charger grew shinier, stronger, and closer to its former glory, the cracks in their relationship deepened beyond repair. The breaking point came the day Ethan decided to invest $12,000 into a full professional paint job. He had saved for months, picking up extra shifts and selling unused tools just to make it happen. To him, it was the final transformation the charger needed, the moment it would finally look like the dream car he'd imagined since childhood. When he brought it back, gleaming in its fresh coat of metallic black, Ethan felt proud for the first time in a long while. But instead of sharing his excitement, Melissa exploded the moment she heard the cost. She accused him of stealing from their future, even though they never had a shared financial plan and kept separate accounts. She claimed he had betrayed her trust and jeopardized their chance to buy a house, a claim Ethan instantly rejected because he had never once agreed to her imaginary timeline. That was when Ethan realized just how deeply Melissa had twisted the narrative. She had told her parents that they were saving together, told her friends that Ethan promised to propose once they bought property, and even implied that he was the one delaying everything. None of it was true. She had created a story where she was the patient partner, and Ethan was the irresponsible anchor holding her back. When he confronted her about the lies, Melissa didn't apologize. Instead, she cried, shouted, and insisted that he should just go along with it, because it made her look better in front of people. The argument that followed was one of the worst they had ever had. Ethan tried to stay calm, but Melissa refused to listen. She blamed him for ruining her reputation. She accused him of embarrassing her by not supporting the story she had invented. She even claimed the car was destroying her life, as if a vehicle could somehow be responsible for the mistakes she didn't want to admit. For the first time, Ethan saw the relationship for what it had become, a constant emotional battlefield where he had to apologize for wanting anything of his own. Nothing he did was ever enough. Nothing he dreamed of was ever acceptable. Nothing he cared about mattered, unless it benefited Melissa. The night she packed a suitcase and stormed out, the house felt strangely quiet, almost peaceful. She left in anger, saying she needed time to think, but she didn't bother to take most of her belongings. Clothes, makeup, boxes of old trinkets. She left them all scattered across his home as if marking territory she still expected to control. Ethan didn't chase after her. He didn't beg, didn't argue, didn't try to fix something that had been broken far too long. For the first time since buying the charger, he felt a sense of clarity. He realized that Melissa was never angry at the car. She was angry at the fact that he had something she couldn't manipulate, reshape, or take credit for. And though he didn't know it yet, her departure wasn't the end of the story. It was only the calm before the storm she would create, when she realized the car she once mocked was about to become worth a fortune. When the restoration was finally complete, Ethan submitted photos of the charger to Barrett Jackson just to see what the experts thought. He expected a modest estimate, maybe enough to cover what he'd put into the build. But when the appraisal came back with a projected value between $150,000 and $180,000, he reread the email 3 times to make sure he wasn't imagining it. For a moment, he simply sat in the garage staring at the car in stunned silence. Every long night, every scraped knuckle, every doubt that had weighed on him suddenly felt worth it. He never restored the charger to make money, but the validation struck him deeper than he expected. He wanted to call someone to share the news, but the only person he thought of was the last person he wanted to speak to. So he kept the moment to himself. At least, until the auction listing went public. Within 48 hours, Melissa showed up at his door as if she had risen from the dead. She didn't text. She didn't call. She didn't even ask how he was. She simply smiled like nothing had ever happened and said she wanted to talk about the car. Before Ethan could respond, she stepped aside and revealed a middle-aged man in a cheap suit standing behind her. She introduced him as her cousin's husband, but then added that he was also a lawyer who specialized in relationship property disputes. The implication was obvious. Melissa acted as though she had every right to the charger despite disappearing months ago and never contributing a cent or an hour of work. She claimed she had been emotionally supportive, even though Ethan could barely remember a single positive comment she'd ever made about the project. She said she had sacrificed opportunities to stand by him, though she never specified what those opportunities were. Then she dropped her most absurd line, yet she insisted the car's value was partly the result of her nurturing presence. Ethan almost laughed, but the lawyer's presence made him realize she wasn't joking. She came prepared, armed with a stack of printed-out screenshots showing the spending log she had kept, trying to frame it as proof of financial involvement. But the most outrageous twist came when Melissa placed a hand over her stomach and announced she might be pregnant. She said they needed to figure this out as a family. Ethan stared at her for several long seconds before quietly telling her he'd had a vasectomy 5 years earlier. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He just told the truth. Melissa froze, the color draining from her face faster than he thought possible. Her so-called lawyer cleared his throat awkwardly, realizing they had walked into a situation they didn't understand at all. The moment felt oddly liberating. For months, Ethan had blamed himself for the way things ended, wondering if he could have done something differently. But now it was clear, Melissa wasn't back because she missed him. She wasn't back because she cared. She was back because the car she once despised had suddenly become valuable. And to her, value always meant opportunity. Ethan closed the door on them without another word, knowing this was only the first wave of trouble she was about to stir. The day of the auction arrived with more intensity than Ethan expected. He had watched Barrett Jackson events for years, but standing there in person, next to a crowd buzzing with energy, felt surreal. The charger gleamed under the showroom lights, polished to perfection, every detail reflecting the years he'd spent bringing it back to life. Collectors walked around it, taking photos, asking questions, admiring the craftsmanship he had poured his soul into. For the first time, Ethan felt truly proud without any trace of guilt or doubt. When the bidding began, the opening offer shot past 6 figures in seconds. Ethan's heart raced as the price climbed higher and higher, the auctioneer's voice slicing through the air with rapid-fire excitement. 150, 160, 175, 180. People gasped as the final bid settled at $190,000. The hammer dropped, and the room erupted in applause. Ethan stood frozen, overwhelmed by the realization that his once-forgotten barn find had become a showstopper worth nearly $200,000. But the celebration didn't last long. Just minutes after the sale, Ethan spotted a figure pushing through the crowd with dramatic urgency. Melissa. She wore an overly confident smile, as if she belonged among the elite collectors and industry professionals around her. Before Ethan could step away, she rushed toward the new owner, extending her hand and introducing herself as the co-restorer of the vehicle. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs as he watched her spin lies with polished confidence. She talked about countless nights in the garage and making tough financial sacrifices, painting herself as the devoted partner behind the build. Some collectors stared at her with mild suspicion, but others simply listened out of politeness. Melissa mistook politeness for validation and continued talking, as if she were accepting an award. Ethan stepped in calmly and corrected her, explaining that she had never worked on the car and had been openly hostile toward the project the entire time. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't embarrass her. He simply stated the truth. The room shifted. People who had just heard Melissa's dramatic monologue now realized she had fabricated everything. The new owner raised an eyebrow and asked her to name a single component she had helped restore. Melissa froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. Security approached at the request of event staff, asking her to step back and stop interfering with the buyers and presenters. She refused, insisting she had rights and involvement, but security remained firm. The moment ended with Melissa being escorted out, while a crowd of spectators watched with awkward disbelief. Ethan felt a mix of relief and embarrassment, knowing this public scene was exactly the kind of chaos she thrived on. As she was led away, she shouted that she would see him in court and that she would get every dollar she deserved. But Ethan knew she hadn't contributed anything except stress, arguments, and lies. Still, he also knew Melissa wasn't someone who backed down easily. He could feel a storm brewing, and the auction was only the spark. The real battle was waiting for him the moment he stepped outside. Melissa filed the lawsuit less than 2 weeks after the auction ended. Ethan wasn't surprised when the envelope arrived, thick with printed accusations and baseless claims. She demanded $10,000, arguing that she had contributed emotional labor, endured shared financial sacrifices, and lost future opportunities because of his decision to restore the car. She even claimed that she had been promised partial ownership, a statement so wildly untrue that Ethan had to reread it twice before laughing out loud. Still, a lawsuit was a lawsuit, and he prepared himself for the headache that would follow. When the court date arrived, Ethan walked in calmly while Melissa entered with exaggerated confidence, wearing a blazer that looked like it still had store tags on it. Her so-called lawyer, her cousin's husband, sat beside her flipping through paperwork he barely understood. The judge began the session by asking for evidence of Melissa's involvement. She proudly handed over the same expense notebook she had shown before, believing it would serve as proof. The judge skimmed through it, frowned, and asked her to clarify which of the listed purchases were hers. She couldn't answer. Every item, every receipt, every entry belonged to Ethan. The judge pointed this out bluntly, nodding that keeping track of someone else's spending did not equal financial contribution. Melissa's confidence began to crack. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had provided support, but the judge interrupted and asked for specific examples or documentation. There were none. Melissa stuttered, switching between emotional pleas and vague statements about commitment and sacrifice. Ethan remained silent, letting her unravel without interruption. When it was his turn to speak, he simply explained that they had never shared accounts, never lived under joint ownership, and never planned any financial venture together. He presented screenshots of messages where Melissa insulted the car, belittled his efforts, and admitted she wanted nothing to do with the project. The judge's expression shifted from neutrality to irritation. After 30 minutes of disorganized arguments from Melissa and her amateur lawyer, the judge dismissed the case entirely. The words were clear and definitive. She had no claim, no right, and no involvement in the vehicle or its value. Melissa stormed out of the courtroom in humiliating silence. Her lawyer avoided eye contact, packing his papers as quickly as possible. Outside the building, she confronted Ethan, insisting the judge was biased and that he had manipulated the situation. Ethan didn't respond. He simply walked past her and went home, closing the final chapter she had been desperately trying to reopen. Over the next few days, the fallout deepened on her side. Her new boyfriend, who had believed her pregnancy lie, discovered the truth and ended their relationship immediately. Friends who once sympathized with her realized she had fabricated entire stories about Ethan. The most unexpected moment came when Melissa's mother called Ethan to apologize. She admitted that Melissa had been trying to impress people with a fantasy life and saw the car's newfound value as a shortcut to the status she craved. Ethan thanked her, but didn't dwell on it. He didn't feel anger anymore, just relief. For the first time in years, Melissa had no control, no leverage, no fabricated story to hide behind. Her attempt to claim a piece of his work had crumbled completely. And as he returned home that evening, Ethan realized that the closure he'd been searching for had finally arrived, not through a conversation, but through the undeniable truth laid out in a courtroom for everyone to see. With the lawsuit behind him and the auction money finally cleared, Ethan allowed himself to breathe in a way he hadn't in years. He paid off the remaining balance on his house, wiped away lingering debts, and set aside a portion for future investments. For the first time, his life felt stable, not because of luck, but because of the years of quiet perseverance he had poured into a project everyone else doubted. He also started dating someone new, a woman who didn't roll her eyes at his passions, but asked thoughtful questions and even joined him in the garage just to keep him company. Their connection grew naturally, without pressure or manipulation. Meanwhile, the Charger found its final home in a well-known automotive museum. Displayed with a small plaque detailing its journey from forgotten scrap to restored treasure. Visitors admired the craftsmanship, unaware of the emotional battles behind its rebirth. Ethan sometimes stopped by the museum, not to relive the chaos, but to appreciate what the car symbolized. It was proof that patience outlasts bitterness, and that dedication can turn even the roughest beginnings into something remarkable. As for Melissa, she faded into the background, a distant reminder of what he had overcome.